And thank you so much for being here at SparkCon 2020. We are happy to bring you the news, the information, and the experts that are all sharing their knowledge this week. And we've had an amazing list of panelists show up, and today is no exception. Geoffrey Cann is here today and sharing some of the things that we're going to be talking about as it relates to change and digital adoption. Geoffrey's been doing some amazing work in the podcasting industry since 2013, sharing the digital tools and the necessary information that you need to be successful in your industry. Also, we're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening and how 2020 is making some changes in digital adoption and some of the things that you might want to consider as an organization rather than knocking on doors and maybe adopting some digital strategies as it goes forward. He's been a trainer, a speaker, an author, and one of the foremost authorities in this digital adoption arena. And so thank you, Geoffrey, for being here. Appreciate you. And I look forward to this presentation and sharing the information that you have for the SparkCon community.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you as well to SparkCon for extending to me the invitation to share my perspectives with you. I witnessed my first, call it digital change, when I was 12. My dad was home from work working in the evening, and the boss had given him this new calculator. And the calculator had a paper tape dispenser on it, so that you did your mathematics on it, and it printed a little proof of what the calculations were. My dad struggled with this because up to that point he did all the math in his head, and I watched him work. He's very fast and good at it, and never made errors. He could do long division in his head, all kinds of complex additions and subtractions. Never made a mistake. But he followed orders and he began to use this sort of calculator. But what I watched him doing was quite funny. He would use the calculator to do the math, and then he would turn around and manually add up all the numbers by hand, because he didn't trust the calculator. I took some real interesting lessons from this, and hindsight being 2020 sometimes, but still, what I found or noted was changing habits, especially things you've learned for a long period of time, is very, very hard. If you don't trust technology, in this case was just a simple calculator, and you don't understand how it works, you're not going to learn to rely on it. And at the time, my dad was probably, I'm going to guess, in his 30s, maybe. I don't have a bit fuzzy on those details. But I did notice that as he got older and older, his ability to embrace these newer technologies got harder and harder. And that led me to this observation, which I've watched over many years in oil and gas, is that embracing change in oil and gas in particular is very, very hard. It's very challenging. And that we need to find new ways to approach change, particularly digitally driven change, because digital is now different in a number of important respects. And I'm going to walk through what I mean by that. And I'm going to wrap the story up with some insights about successful companies who have driven change in digital, what they've done about it and how they've gone about it. And I'll give you a 4-step approach that you can trial in your organization if you're delivering change. And hopefully your change efforts will be faster and with less disruption. So you might admire these little cartoons. I to avoid lawsuits, I draw all my own artwork on my website and my blog site. So this is R2D2. Robots are coming to the industry, and that's the idea behind this cartoon. But here's a few things I've noticed about digital. One is it's very democratic. By that I mean digital tools are within range of everyone now. It's no longer the purview of what I would call the elite companies or the super majors. The jobs that digital is now reaching are what I would also describe earlier as untouchable jobs. They were the jobs that were the privilege of highly educated and sophisticated oil workers, not just your frontline workers, but now everyone in the industry. And those of us who are managers and supervisors and observers in the industry, we note that many of the building blocks to transform this work are now falling neatly into place. Everything from ubiquitous networks, cloud computing, the ability to do lots of analytics on demand, a blockchain to enable trust. All the building blocks are now starting to emerge. And you can start to see the outlines of what this is going to do, particularly in the transportation system. All around the United States today, there are trials of trucking operations without a driver at the wheel, because these building blocks and the technology is present, ubiquitous, and is reaching a cost point where this is now within grasp of many organizations. And of course, what's also being unlocked are what I call new business models. These new business models that we see in the consumer world are now coming over into oil and gas. And the new business models I'll just use one example. BP is using a technology called Kelvin to run entire oil fields in the United States, because it's cheaper and more reliable than having what I would call the untouchable jobs of the past, the oil field engineer supervising all of those wells. So these new business models are going to be very, very, very disruptive to the industry. And that's why it feels different today. At the same time, this would be my observation from working across the industries. We're not getting it right. The industry has not yet figured out how to embrace these changes at the speed by which they are evolving, and we end up in, like this poor fellow, trapped in a wheel in a cage, racing furiously and getting no further ahead. A kind of pilot project hell. And what does this turn out to? What does it look like? Well, pilot projects that run in perpetuity, never seem to go to scale or break out of their pilot stage. The adoption rate of technology in oil and gas continues to trail other industries, so it's incredibly slow. In fact, analysis shows that new digital technologies at best have a 1% to 2% success rate once they get unleashed into the world. That does, of course, rise to over 30% when an industrial company, such as an oil and gas company, takes a direct and firm hand in steering digital innovations. So the success rate goes up quite dramatically with some hands-on guidance from the oil industry directly. But very few oil companies behave that way. They keep the innovators sometimes at too much at an arm's length relationship, which is quite traditional in many procurement models in oil and gas. And the result of this is that some killer solutions sit on the sideline and don't get the traction they deserve. Another note, aside from high failure rates, I observe is that the numbers of changes, that the kinds of change that oil companies are going after tend to be what I call small change, not big embracing change, not overhaul or transform the world change, but rather incremental improvements to the current state of operations. And that incrementalism is not the right pattern for success. It is not going to achieve very much. And the consequence of that is that people who are paying for this, boards and management teams, can easily get discouraged and go, why are we spending money on this? It's not resulting in anything particularly material. Young people are avoiding our industry now. I, as a non-industry, I'm not a direct industry employee, so I don't work for an oil company. This gives me the advantage is I'm on the receiving end of a constant flow of anguish from young people who are saying, I don't think this industry is for me now. Like, it doesn't look like it's got much, it has a future. And so talent is now starting to avoid the industry. This isn't true in all cases. A big oil company in Calgary has told me that they're having no problem at all attracting data scientists to join their company, because oil and gas companies have the best and juiciest data problems. And that's like candy to a data scientist. But if you're a coder and your skill set is in building technology, the oil and gas industry is not going to be your first port of call. And so talent is starting to avoid the sector. If you look around, it's interesting, you don't see any what I would call digital energy companies of any kind, that's power, oil and gas, who have said, you know what, we're going to be digital first. Whereas you do see that in many other industries. You see digital banks, you see digital media companies, you see digital distribution businesses, digital logistics companies, but no digital energy companies yet. So we haven't quite crossed that path yet either. And then last but not least, where are the unicorns? In virtually all other industry areas, you'll see unicorn companies popping up with billion-dollar valuations in startup mode with novel technologies. No unicorns yet in oil and gas, in supplying technology to this industry. And so we're not getting it right, would be my observation. I was interviewing a chap in an artificial intelligence company about why smart technologies struggle to succeed in this industry. And let me walk you through a little thought experiment just so I can show you what I mean. Imagine a scenario like this. You ask a machine to give you a recommendation or an observation. And so the machine is either correct or incorrect in its recommendation or observation, and you either agree or disagree with it, or you're just not sure what the answer is. And this could go something like this. And I do this all the time with home tools. I might say to Siri, is it going to rain today? Now, Siri could be correct, or Siri could be incorrect. Let's imagine Siri is correct, and it is going to rain today, and I agree that it's going to rain today. In fact, I look outside today and I go, you know what, it's raining, and Siri agrees that it's going to rain today. What a waste of time. The machine hasn't done anything useful for me, and worse, if my company has spent money to buy this machine, it's wasted company money. Now let's imagine the machine says, yes, it's going to rain. And I also agree, yeah, I think it's going to rain today. I'm going to wear a raincoat today. And then it doesn't rain today. The machine was incorrect and I fell for it. What a stupid machine. It gave me wrong advice. It led me down the garden path. I didn't get the outcome I wanted. And worse, I'm wandering around wearing a raincoat all day. Stupid machine. Not a good outcome. Let's answer the same question again. Hey, is it going to rain today? And I don't agree that it's going to rain today. But the machine is correct. It does, in fact, rain today. What happens to me? Well, I didn't go along with this recommendation. I'm going to wear a poor performance review. It may be that I get all wet that day, but not a good outcome for me. I should have listened to the machine. But what if the machine says it's going to rain today, but then it doesn't rain today? I didn't think it was going to rain either. What a stupid machine. It was incorrect. Didn't give me any good guidance. Now, let's turn the tables to where we have, say, a junior employee or a junior person who not familiar with weather patterns, or in our case, in oil and gas, how a machine might behave in a pump setting in a factory. We might say to the machine, hey, machine, is it going to rain today? And the machine says, yes, it is. It's going to rain today. And the human, I don't know, but sure enough, it rains. Oh the machine's smarter than I am. For young people, this isn't as much of a deal, actually, because young people are okay with the fact that the machine might be a little brighter. But I can tell you, if you're an older employee and the machine is now suddenly smarter than you after 30 years of your experience, the machine is now correctly predicting things that you didn't know. You weren't able to do that. Not good. Very hard on your self-esteem. But let's imagine the machine is incorrect and the employee also doesn't know whether it's incorrect. So what does the employee do? Go along with the machine. And it doesn't work. Now what do? Blame storming. Wasn't my fault. I was just listening to the machine. Here are 6 scenarios. Not one of them is a good outcome when it comes to smart technologies and the use of smart technologies in industry. So we shouldn't be at all surprised, frankly, when we take these innovative technologies, particularly the newer smart tools, we take them into companies and we try to get employees to embrace them. I was on a panel discussion with industry representatives from various industries, but seated right beside me was a chap from a mining concern. And they had an algorithm they put into place that was like a weather predictor. And this business had a settling pond, a water treatment facility. When the temperature got down to below freezing, the water treatment facility would struggle to treat the water, obviously, because it turns to ice. But so the employees knew that when the weather, they could watch the weather pattern. If the weather was going to suggest that the situation was going to get cold, they would quickly shut that equipment down. What the machine said, though, was don't do that. Let the temperature go way down, like for -10, -15 before you act, because the amount of time it takes for the water to get down in temperature to the point where it's a problem, you've got lots of time to continue running the equipment. A room full of the best engineers who had spent a lifetime working in that area argued up and down with management that the machine was absolutely incorrect. This was flat out the wrong thing to do. And in the end, management overrode the engineers and said, let's go with the machine. We will wear it. If it doesn't work, it's not going to be on you guys. We're going to take accountability for this. We want to see what would happen. Well, guess what? The machine correctly predicted if you let the temperature of the water go down another 10 degrees, it actually improved performance, and they increased the yield out of that water treatment facility. They never would have gotten there without management saying to the employees, we got your back. Let's give this a go. Left to our devices, as my little thought experiment walks us through here, smart technologies struggle to succeed because they're going up against sophisticated business problems with sophisticated users. And we need to think a little differently about that. The question that I think oil and gas companies don't ask nearly enough is, how is this making you feel? Is it making you feel threatened and concerned? There's little face bubbles here to kind of illustrate what I mean. Is it making you threatened? Is it making you curious? Are you interested? Does it make you feel very disappointed or discouraged or sad? Or does it make you feel pretty happy? Actually, the things are a good outcome. Management in oil and gas rarely ask about this. I find oil and gas companies in the main are analytic, mathematical, proof-based, science and evidence structured, and the whole idea that there is an emotional undercurrent going on in oil and gas is set to the side. And the problem with digital is we've got to bring that up. If I just look at my story of my pair of engineers who are dealing with water treatment facilities, how were they feeling when management dropped in this algorithm and said, we're going to use the algorithm to override your 30 years of experience, and it's going to now tell you how to run the plant? How would they possibly feel good about that? Unless management takes time to think about, okay, what is the countervailing, the alternative message I'm going to share with talk to my employees about? How will the employees buy in? I find that there are all kinds of subtle excuses, variations in language you hear when you talk about digital in organizations. And let me just walk through these with you so you can see what some of these excuses look like. Here's one. I don't understand digital. In fact, I don't think it applies to us, actually. We're an oil and gas company. This is a breakdown in education. Someone with this message does not understand. And the antidote to that is education and awareness. Here's another one. Digital is important. Oh, I agree with that. But it's not the priority for us. Have you even seen the price of oil? Like, our industry is in the ditch. We've got to do other things besides digital. This is a problem in strategy. This is a problem where management has failed to explain to employees the strategic imperative to embrace digital change. Here's another one. Don't worry, digital is just a passing fad. It'll fade like everything else. This is a failure of leadership and vision. Management has failed to sketch out for the employee base. This is where our industry is going. And more importantly, this is where we're going and where we're going to take the industry. That's a gap in vision. Here's one. Remember that late or over budget IT project we did last decade or last century in the case of some of us, and no value was ever delivered? That's going to be the same thing with digital. This is an example of execution problems or execution challenges where the practices of good change management haven't been brought to bear. How about this one? My data is mine. I'm not sharing that. I'm certainly not collaborating with those guys. The risk is just way too high. And have you even seen the cybercrime problems? This is an old business model message. This is individuals clinging to artifacts based on how the industry used to behave, not how the industry is going to behave, but how the industry used to behave. How about this one? Well, we tried that and it didn't work. This is an example, again, of execution issues, lack of resilience and lack of trial and error, the waterfall method prevailing where agile thinking has not yet been brought to bear. Or how about this one? Digital's not really our core business, frankly. And to tell you the truth, it's overhyped and it's just consulting speak. Again, this is a strategy and business model problem. Digital is now so fundamental to some parts of the industry, particularly the power industry. One of the things I get to do in my journey through life is I'm interviewing people for an upcoming conference in the Middle East. The number of individuals I've spoken to have said, we can no longer easily discern a distinction between a digital enterprise in energy, power particularly, digital as one idea and power as another idea. They're now becoming so interconnected that we can no longer separate them. Now, how do you build trust in machines? That ultimately is the question. Here's our friend the robot. He's about to shoot an arrow off of this guy's head. You can trust me. I'm from the future. It's not so easy. Trust building is inherently human. Machines don't care about trust. They don't even understand trust. It's not a concept that's programmed into one of these machines. Trust building is such an inherently human function that we don't even know yet how to express it correctly so that machines can understand it. And here's just a few elements of what makes for trust. One is we care. Humans care about being reliable. We care when we say to someone, yes, that'll be done by Tuesday. We care to be seen as reliable, as meeting our commitments. Machines have no such concept. It's either programmed in that they meet their commitments or they don't. Humans are endlessly adaptable. We can flex and go with the times. Look at the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic arrives and 2 weeks later, we're all working from home. Yeah, there was some grumbling about it, but for the most part, most companies just picked up and relocated their employees. We are endlessly adaptable. Machines, much less so. Humans exercise judgment. A great example of this is that pilot Scully, who landed in an airplane on the Hudson River. He had to exercise judgment in the moment. Engine failure, have to land this aircraft. Where can I find a flat stretch in New York City, of all places, where I can drop an aircraft down? And he landed it on the river. Talk about exercising judgment. We humans love to exercise their judgment. Should it be this or should it be this? Should I wear a raincoat today? Should I not? And humans, in many cases, they can be held to account. Some like to be held to account. Some don't, admittedly. But humans, for the most part, we can hold people to account. We can hold them to account to help them improve their judgment. And we do this as parents with children, as probably the example we can all relate to. But it also shows up in sports and many other fields of endeavor. And finally, humans are very sensitive to emotions. Machines are not. Machines can't tell if you're feeling sad. They can't modify their own behavior, their own language or choices just because you're not reacting well. Sometimes our emotions are completely hidden. Like you can't pick them up or detect them in looks or gestures or sound or anything. Machines will not be able to pick up on these subtle emotional cues. So a question might be, therefore, how do we harness this emotional thinking and emotional journey that make up the human animal? How do we harness that in the context of driving change? Let me give you a little framework to think about. How do you find, what are the motivators of business? And I call these the cold business logic motivators. And there are three. And there are three parallels in human emotions too, by the way. But here's the three business ones. First is growth. Especially Western capitalist system, we are obsessed with growth. growth in share price, capturing new markets, improving our profitability. It's all about growth. That's counterbalanced, though, with risk. We don't like risk in business. We don't like variability in performance. We don't like losses. We don't like to suffer loss of revenues or erosion of asset performance. We don't like risk. So while we like growth, we balance that with risk. And the color here is important, by the way. Green, growth is green. It's go, go, go. Risk, though, stop, stop, stop. Don't do something that's going to cause us a problem, that's going to cause a risk to the business. And the third, what I call business logic driver, is brand. Companies are very concerned about their brand. How am I perceived by my employees, by my market, by my customers? There are three exact parallels, which I call the hot human emotions, to these three. Number one, what's the parallel to growth? Greed. Now, this is a loaded word, to be honest, and I'm struggling to find a better one for it. But humans, we seek our own kind of personal growth. I want a bigger house. I'd like to drive a nicer car. I'd like to live in a better neighborhood. I'd like to send my kids to a better school. I'd like to have money set aside for my future. I like to buy toys. I like to go to nice restaurants. You can't do that unless you have at least some sense of a desire to accumulate so that you can pursue that agenda. That doesn't apply to all people, and I'm not saying that this is a universal thing, but there is definitely an element here of human greed. And people do want, and especially in many corporate settings, to get the next promotion, get the larger office, get a better job. The counterbalance to that, though, is fear. People don't like to lose their jobs. Don't need to say that. People are afraid of getting sick at work because of the pandemic. People are afraid of loss of markets. What's my value? What's my service going to be in my company? People fear their loss of status in organizations. My two engineers dealing with the water problem that I talked about earlier. What were they afraid of? What were they afraid of? They were afraid of losing their status in the company. They were afraid of being displaced by a machine. They were afraid for their jobs. Fear is a big human emotional driver. And the third exact parallel to brand is pride. People take pride in their work in oil and gas. You can see this in spreadsheets. Oil and gas professionals, we build some of the most beautiful, elegant spreadsheets imaginable. Multi-tabbed, complicated, macro-driven monsters, gigabytes of storage. There's a lot of pride of ownership in building those spreadsheets, building plants, building pipelines. Employees take a lot of pride in that work. And pride drives things like our dignity, our self-worth, makes us relevant. Those are the human motivators. They're under the surface and they're driving, and they help explain why and how companies, when they go to try to drive digital change, how can they harness some of these emotional elements so that the success of their digital endeavors can be improved. Let me walk you through a story of one company that had to do exactly that. This company is a company called NAL Resources in Alberta. And NAL's been in the news lately because they're about to be purchased. But a couple of years ago, 2014, those of you old enough to remember, have been in the industry long enough, you'll remember that in 2014, the price of oil went down. By 2015, the standard playbook in oil and gas had largely been exhausted. The supply chain had been squeezed, the payrolls had been cut, the projects had been terminated. But in the case of many Canadian oil companies, still wasn't enough. NAL embarked on a program to implement some digital technologies to improve features or aspects of their business model. And specifically, they brought in some bot technology to automate the calculation of royalties. In Canada, oil well is often owned by multiple parties. And so the royalties that come off the oil well, the revenues that you gain, are shared with all of those parties, including the expenses, so that the parties share equally in both the upside and the downside. But the calculation of the royalty is a complicated mathematical problem. NAL implemented a bot technology to improve this performance of the calculation of these royalties, and it improved by 95%. That's correct. Not 1%, not 5%, 95%. The robots programmed to calculate the royalties were able to do the same job that their human technicians could do. Instead of taking 8 to 10 minutes per calculation, the robot does it in about 40 to 45 seconds. 95% productivity improvement. Needless to say, this is very alarming for people who might be afraid for their jobs. So the question for the company was, how do we turn this emotional energy under the surface? How do we harness that so that it can be put to good? And so what they told their employees, very simply, here's what we're going to do. The extra capacity we're going to get by squeezing this mundane and routine work out of our company, we're going to apply to growth. We're going to grow the business. We're not going to cut headcount. We're going to grow. We're going to use this as an acquisition platform to expand the business. Because by managing their costs and creatively through these digital technologies, they improve their cash flow position, and we're therefore able to go and acquire new assets. It became a growth play, not a downsizing play. A couple of lessons in all of this. Never waste a crisis. NAL, at that time, with oil prices being what they were, NAL concluded this is precisely the time to try and engineer some change in our company. Now, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of energy expended internally to convince people that this was a useful thing to do, but the success was pretty profound. Never waste a crisis. Number 2, got to start somewhere. You can study this forever and not make progress. NAL first thought the highest prize would be to go out into the operations area. But in reality, their biggest and fastest path to value was in tackling some of this back-end routine calculation work. You have to start somewhere. And in many cases, it might not be at the front of the business. It might be in the back. Number 3, fail cheaply. They spent no more than, I think they passed on to me, just a few thousands of dollars to build their first round of bots. And by the way, the first one didn't work. Second one didn't work. They went through iteration after iteration after iteration before the bot could finally calculate the royalties as well as a human. So have to fail cheap. Fail cheap is one of the key things. And digital, actually, it's very easy to fail cheap because you can do things that don't cost a lot of money. It takes a team. One of the lessons they learned from this is that while they were able to get the bot to do the royalty calculation, it was entirely a month-end driven problem. But if they hadn't gotten the help desk on board and the team in IT that support the infrastructure that runs the bots, at the end of the month, if the bot tipped over and didn't work, it would take a team to stand the thing back up. So they had to build new connections in the company to be able to let this technology execute. In fact, the bot technology crossed organizational boundaries. That's where the real magic came about. It started in one part of the company. The bot was executing a process that ran through multiple parts of the company. So it takes a team. And last but not least, tell everyone, successes and failures. They didn't hide this inside the company and keep it under wraps. They were very, very vocal about what they were doing. And in fact, they went on stage in many parts of Calgary to talk about what they were up to, because they recognize that if they don't tell people what they're doing, then the industry itself is going to suffer because it's not taking advantage of this success. And many of the things that they were working on actually would require their counterparties in the community to also behave differently. So it made a lot of sense. Let's go and share what we're up to here. It's good for everybody, actually. So tell everybody, not just inside the company, but outside. So here's my recipe for those change agents out there that are wrestling with change. And another little cartoon I wrote, drew up about a big oil employee bragging about the Agile project. It's the red one way down in the organization, not very agile. But you have to find new ways of working is one of the key things. There are two laws in digital that are driving the digital industry. The first law we all know about is Moore's law. It's the law of exponential change. And Gordon Moore recognized that over time, some things demonstrate an exponential rate of change. And that could be capability going up or costs going down. But every 18 months or so, there's a doubling or a halving effect. We see this in the virus, in the pandemic, by the way. It's also growing, according to Gordon Moore's exponential change law. We're actually growing the numbers of cases exponentially in many jurisdictions. The second law, though, is not as well understood. It's named after Robert Metcalfe. Robert Metcalfe was retained by the British government to try and understand how to value network assets that the Thatcher government was selling. And he learned that, or his model is that a network asset, its value is equal to n squared. N squared. The number of nodes on your network squared is the value of your network. This explains why digital companies move so fast to build out a network. Because if they do, they create huge value. Plus, they gain a monopoly position. These two laws applied together are accelerating the digital world. And oil and gas needs to keep up. And to do that, we have to find new ways of working. And so one of the ways goes by labels like agile. But these new cycles of work are far more iterative than oil and gas is used to. We trial and error, and we repeat over and over till we get it right. Very, very iterative. Doesn't work this way typically in oil and gas. We go down a waterfall. At each step of the way, it has to be absolutely buttoned down before we move on to the next step. I think some parts of oil and gas will be forever waterfall, but a great deal of our work could be done iteratively. Next from NAL's, and a lesson from NAL, move fast, really fast, like really, really fast. Not 2 years from now we will have something, but no, in 90 days, we need to be able to stand up something that's actually working. What does that actually look like? Number 3, no money. In NAL's case, they said to the team working on it, we're going to give you a little bit of money. Let's put digital to work here. If it's really as cheap as they say it is, and there's a general view that many parts of digital are done incredibly cheaply, let's prove it. Little to no capital, and good, which is good because the oil and gas industry doesn't have a ton of capital right now, but very, very low expenditure on capital. Number 4, making things very much interconnected. The magic at NAL, which is a very useful situation that they were in, is that the innovations they worked on didn't just sit in one part of the organization. They span the organization. Many digital benefits accrue when you go beyond a narrow single executive position in your company. Learn quick, which follows obviously from iterative and fast, but how do you capture those lessons and roll them into your next iterative cycle? Next big step, after you change ways of working, change the narrative. Change the narrative. NAL was particularly good at this. They asked this question: where are we going with digital? Like, what's the point of all of this? You have to define the future, and you have to be particularly responsive to what I call radio station WIIFM. What's in it for me? Employees need to hear, what is in this for me? You want me to embrace this tool? Have you got my back? Am I going to be fired because I've learned this new technology? If this new technology is better at my job than I am, what are you going to do for me? Like what's in this for me? And last, how do you train or change up the narrative within NAL was, how do you change a job loss argument into a job win argument? How do you paint that picture? Well, and I forgot to mention another key secret here to change the narrative is find the influencers in the company. It might not be on the org chart who they are, but the influencers can be, you can work with your influencers to help change the narrative and relay the narrative to the rest of your employees. Next, step 3, set yourself up for success. I mentioned already a few key steps here, and I call these are the orthodoxies, the ways of working. I've thrown these in the trash because we have to do some things quite differently. One is education. We need to educate ourselves around what the digital actually means, because it takes the whole of company to get behind these initiatives to drive change, especially if they're going to cross organizational boundaries. And not just in oil and gas, by the way, you have to go to other sectors. Benchmarking becomes really important. Knowing what other industries are up to is very, very key here. And because digital is changing so fast because of Moore and Metcalf, the bar is constantly changing. So the setting your target here and then not revisiting the target frequently is a real problem. You could dramatically undershoot where you need to be. Next is executive sponsorship, and I can't underscore this enough. And in fact, my last slide today, we'll talk through some lessons for executives, but you have to get executive sponsorship. Measuring that they're the ones who support you, measuring the baseline. Establishing the performance metrics, getting digital baked into the company at that executive level is really, really critical. Some of the industry leaders, for instance, to actually take a stake in their digital startup companies that they're working with. How are you going to do that unless you've got your executives on board to agree to spend the money that way? Next, you have to protect people who are taking trials. Do you have my back? Remember my engineers dealing with water. They're the first on the line to deal with this innovation rollout. Did management have their back? And of course, I mentioned earlier, adopting agile ways of working and thinking about the user experience. You know, some of the fastest growing technologies in oil and gas start with the user experience in mind, building beautiful technology, not just technology that works for the asset, but is it beautiful and fun to work with? And of course, planning for scale. At the very start of these projects, it is all about how are you going to scale this up? Step 4, execute. And the word agile keeps cropping up through these slides. I don't know if you've noticed, but I want to underscore this point. Executing with agility is absolutely key. And that means a few things differently for digital adoption. Digital can take place on site. Digital tools, because of their lightweight, low code, work in the cloud, you don't have to be in a distant from where the work actually gets done. You can actually do digital work right at the face of the business. The companies that demonstrate the fastest take up in digital, they're doing the work directly with their employees at the face where the work gets done. So take it to the site. Next, you got to aim at real business problems. What's really driving the organization? The oil and gas industry has no tolerance or time for science projects. This is about fixing real business issues. Next, make sure you get and grant get out of jail cards. Who's got your back? If things tip over and don't work, you need to assure the employees failure is not going to result in you losing your job. This is a tough one for oil and gas because we have very low tolerance for failure. The requirements for safety and reliability and performance are very high in the industry. So failure is not something the industry easily embraces. But in the case of digital, having a get out of jail card for trial and error is actually really key. Aligning IT and OT. So the IT is my commercial IT team that supports technologies, and my OT team that is supporting my operational tools. The best in the industry are aligning these two organizations because digital crosses these two boundaries. In fact, many digital tools are based on the exact same chips and chipsets that drive both IT and OT. So merging them together and putting them under a single leadership actually is one of the secrets to success. This is a tough one, really tough to get over, but you can see it in a good example is drone technology. How can you fly a drone over a facility for an inspection without pulling both IT and OT together to work on this problem? The drone's not going to know where the assets are unless your operations people tell it. This is the cracker. This is the power plant. This is the utilities and offsites area. But at the same time, if you want to get access to maintenance records, purchase orders, set up an inspection report, the IT team is going to be the team that supports those technologies. So these new robots and drone technologies, they blend together the two. And keeping them in separate worlds is starting to become a bit of a barrier. So thinking about how you merge them together is one of the secrets in a digital adoption. And last but not least, and I've mentioned this, is persistence. Executing with agility does not mean you do 4 iterations, it doesn't work, you throw it away. Sometimes this is 50, 60, 70 iterations to get it right. So persistence really, really matters. Now, let me wrap up with a handful of messages for business executives who are potentially working on the in staring at this. And what is your role? What is your thinking here? Number one, honor your past, but you need to define your future. Honor your past means telling your people what we've done to date has been great. It's been made us very, very successful, but it is not going to be our success criteria in the future. Here's what our future is going to be. Honor the past, define the future. Number two, and I've mentioned this before, make sure your organization focus on business drivers and real pain points. No science projects. Make it real. Number three, think big, but start small and be fast moving and agile. You know, when you think about, I'll use an example from Rio. Rio, the mining company, Rio evolved these automated heavy hauler trucks in the mine sites in Australia. But they've also developed the automated train. The automated train has no human operators on it. And soon they're going to have the automated fully underground mine. What is their vision? Like when they say to their suppliers, you know, here's what we're working on, they express this as the fully automated mining or operation. That's a big vision. Where did they start? Let's just try and get an automated haul truck to drive a straight line. Start small. Number four, CEO as change leader. In order to get digital to really start moving in your organization and get change happening at pace, 30% of all of your employees at every level, it's executives, senior vice presidents, VPs, directors, supervisors, frontline employees, they all have to be educated and on board with the change agenda. You have to get to that tipping point in order for the effort to start to succeed. So the CEO is actually the key change agent here. Number five, communicate, 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 repeat. Many of those excuses that I touched on earlier are a direct result of a failure of management to communicate what they're trying to do. So relentless communications, number five. Number six, security. One of the biggest issues that the industry wrestles with is how do we maintain security over our facilities and our assets? Security is quickly becoming on par with safety. And that's the next rule to think about. How do we help our employees agree to embrace this at the same time we get it embedded into the psyche of our industry as if it's the same caliber as safety? Number seven, where do you focus? Take aim at the data. Data is the new critical asset. It is the thing that distinguishes digital companies from the energy industry. The top 5 companies in the world are all digital companies. Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, Alibaba, Tencent. These companies are all incredibly rich data companies. Data is the asset, actually. And so taking careful aim at data becomes quite critical. And so for executives, that's your point number 7. Ask, where are we at with managing our data more effectively? Number 8, remember how I mentioned the speed of change and how fast these machines are learning? Well, guess what? Us legacy machines, humans, we are going to have to step up to a lifelong learning agenda to build the competencies we're going to need for the future. The idea that you just go to university, get your degree, and you're done for the next 40 years, it's not going to cut it in the future. The machines are going to be getting educated and getting smarter at pace. We need to become lifelong learners. And it's executives and leadership in companies that support that and make that part of the mission of the company, building a lifelong learning organization. And number 9, stay the course. There's no U-turn ahead with digital. We're not going back to the way we were. This is how it's going to be. So we have to stay the course. Be relentless and persistent with that agenda. There's my advice for executives. Let me wrap with just one final thought. You could be, these are two guys I draw in a bar occasionally, sharing a joke and sharing a story. But here's a story that I think is part of the storyline for us. I've been asked to find a bold and innovative solution to do exactly what we've done for the last 25 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope this is not you. Be the group that finds that bold and innovative solution for the future, and break with the past, because sticking with the past is not going to sustain us down the road. Thank you very much. And Russ, if you're online, now's the time for Q&A. There's a chat box somewhere.
Geoffrey, that was an incredible presentation. And I know that there's a couple of questions we had, and you may have answered all of these questions. I just want to touch base on them and reiterate also.
Yep.
Is David asked, he just wanted to qualify, is it Celsius or Fahrenheit when you're referring to the cold? It's like,
Celsius.
Yeah, Celsius.
Yeah, exactly. The issue here was this is a equipment that was doing water filtration, and the employees forever and a day said once the water freezes at 0 Celsius, you shut everything down. But the data was very clear. You could run to -10, and it works even better. This company found, I think they said, a 40% productivity boost from this machine.
Wow.
And the employees were like, we've been doing it the wrong way for a decade, like 2 decades, right? It was a great outcome.
And that's really, and then what you also alluded to that I wanted to kind of touch base on and expand with is the fact that I think a lot of organizations, and this is not necessarily unique to the oil and gas industry. I think it's one of those issues that is a people person and a challenging issue for, if I learn this or I adopt this technology, what happens to my job? And I think that's really, a lot of individuals feel that way. And I think that as organizations from the leadership down adopt the position that we're going to use it as a growth mechanism rather than a declining element, we can actually get very creative, because a lot of the employees have the creativity in how they would remove mundane tasks. And as we initiate, AI and machine learning and things like that, there's a lot of things that we could use to monitor rather than do it ourselves. So those are some key points.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The possibilities presented by digital tools are almost endless. I do think that the measures and performance metrics put into place are often leading people to the wrong answer, which is, if I learn a new skill that somehow changes my job, I'm going to be the first up against the wall. Like, I don't think so. Not now. If you are an expert in some domain area, say some facility service, and you're also suddenly becoming much more switched on about how cloud will affect this, or maybe blockchain or machine tools, suddenly you're the expert on 2 domains, right? Two domains. And the digital one's growing at exponential rates. Oil and gas is desperately trying to get that insight into the company. You're going to be in demand. You're going to have to be in demand. So to ignore all of this, I think, is the greater career sin, as opposed to getting involved with it.
Yeah, every challenge presents an opportunity. And I think if individuals and organizations adopt that behavior and say, if I learn A and B, what it does is it increases and enhances your value to the organizations, because then you're playing in a couple of different areas of the organization, operations and technology. We touched on this base on yesterday on Chad and Aman's presentation, where the silos, bridging those silos in the organization is also key, and I think it comes from leadership as well. And I wanted to also, David asked, would you say another example of cold business logic is the obsession with quantify everything, such as KPIs, may not be as subtle as it needs to be valid? And I think it kind of goes along the same lines. It's, when you iterate and you fail fast, as they say, and you adopt some of the behaviors in startups in digital domains and digital organizations, it really becomes more, from a data scientist perspective, it becomes a more of a problem solving effort than how can we do this, rather than this is the way we've always done it. So there's a transition in that mindset as well in the organization. And so it's like you get less on the KPIs and more about how you can improve and enhance those behaviors from the organization.
Yeah, I mean, just in response to David's observation, I would say that much of the KPI exercise in oil in industry in general is because it's either trying to further growth and drive it up, or manage risk and send it down. And so a lot of the metrics are really aimed at that. I had a fun project once. I was retained by a large pipeline company, multi-divisional now, with a renewable energy arm and traditional pipeline arm. And the question they said was, how many performance metrics are we really using in this company? So we set out to count them, and we found, and I'm not lying at all, not even an exaggeration, over 20,000 specific measures in the traditional pipeline business to run the business.
Yeah.
1,000. Like, it was how on earth they could possibly run the business with that many metrics beyond me. The renewable business, though, which was brand new, like maybe 10 years old, 110 metrics.
Yeah.
Very different mindset about how to run a renewable business than a pipeline business. Now, admittedly, electrons from renewable is very different from running liquids through a pipe. But the point is that the KPI, what you see as KPIs in oil and gas, in many cases, completely out of control. 20,000 metrics. Like, you couldn't even report to put them all on. It was just to be impossible.
Well, how does a human actually articulate some of the data that's coming in and extract it to a meaningful outcome? It's really hard. And that's where AI and machine learning are really impacting a lot of industries. Yeah. And I guess my question that came from the internet, from social, is how do we, or are there examples of other organizations, much like the oil and gas industry, that are more digital that we can look at and maybe look at examples of what has been completed and been successfully deployed or developed, and maybe use those as an example? Have you seen any good digital adoption models that are out there that I know you mentioned the one that you expressed a great deal of the expansion on. So what are some other areas?
Yeah, the one that I point to and sort of direct people to pay close attention to is Rio. Rio is an extractive industry. It is so similar to oil and gas, commodity-based, global in its reach and footprint, and has many of the same features. Virulent social opposition in many cases, highly dependent on water resources, leaves in a significant environmental footprint. But you know what? They're moving very, very fast to rethink the mining industry. And one of their messages, or one of their insights, was they were in an arms race, and oil and gas is in an arms race. We're in an arms race to improve safety performance and safety outcomes so that people don't get harmed. But Rio asks a different question. Why don't we take people out of harm's way entirely? Now, to do that, you have to embrace automation, Internet of Things, cloud computing, machine learning, robots. That's where they're going. They're saying, let's take people completely out of harm's way. That doesn't mean they're running a business with no people. It just means
I was just going to say that the people have been moved into the automation and digital arena where they're not exposed to the risks.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Oil and gas doesn't come at the world with that mindset, but that's what mining is. So I keep an eye on Rio. The other one I watch a lot is Amazon. Mm-hmm. Their obsession with customer service, the customer relationship is remarkable, and their ability to introduce change into what's a very, very large business is extraordinary. So I keep an eye on Amazon.
Yes. A lot of things are happening. Hey, I just want to thank you so much for being here, Geoffrey. I know it's it went quickly, and I hope this information lands on the people and the teams that need to adopt change. Look at how their organization is growing and scaling and moving forward. And digital is here to stay. And it looks like, edge computing is in place and Internet of Things. And you got so many different opportunities that are out there that we
Yeah.
really need to make sure that we pay attention and understand. So how's a good way of getting a hold of you and tracking you down for other future conversations?
Well, I've just popped up on the screen here my contact details. So the easiest way is look for me by name. It's Geoffrey with a G, and feel free to phone or email or follow me on Twitter or visit my website geoffreycann.com. That's where my blog sites are. Or follow me on LinkedIn. Look for me by name and by all means reach out and get in touch. This is just one of 3 or 4 presentations I do over and over and over again for specific audiences. And if you're people watching this, if they think, I should bring this presentation into my company, give me a ring and we can talk through how to do that.
Fantastic. And if you have any questions and you want to reach out for the SparkCon team, hi@sparkthought.com, and make sure that you ask questions, address it, and make those connections. Communicate with us, and also follow up and make sure that you have an opportunity to meet and greet and start the dialogue for your organization. SparkCon 2020 will continue. We have Scott Gailey this afternoon at 2 p.m. Central Time. So join us in that session to find out about improving construction and services agreements as we continue SparkCon 2020. Geoffrey, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to next steps and the future of oil and gas.
Yep. Bye for now, and thank you, everyone.
Take care.